As its name implies, watercolor is another type of water-soluble paint. This again means that water can be used as the paint's vehicle for dispersion. Artists can find watercolor in two different forms. The first and most traditional form of watercolor comes in a dry block that needs to be wet before use. The watercolor set that you may remember from kindergarten is a cheaper version of dry block watercolor with much lower quality pigments. Today, watercolors are also available in a tube with a liquid binder already added. These tubes are very small because they have a concentration of pigment that's much greater than those of oil or acrylic paints. The binder in watercolor is gum arabic, a natural sap derived from the acacia tree. Gum arabic is non-toxic, and its gooey consistency makes it ideal for a number of other applications. It can be found commercially in many sodas, candies, and household products. Watercolor is generally applied to the support of a heavy paper rather than to a less porous canvas or board. The weight of a heavy paper stops it from bowing as easily once it's been wet. Watercolor paint is best characterized by its washy appearance. With watercolor, it is easy to produce even gradients of color, and it is a fairly forgiving medium in that it can be re-wet after it has already dried. When the paint is wet, it can even be blotted and erased. Often, the only limitation for reworking watercolors is the durability of the support itself. The more a paper is wet, the more likely it will tear. The Northern Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer used watercolor paints to make many illustrations from nature. Artists have traditionally used watercolor as a sketching tool because of its portability and fast drying time. Walton Ford is a contemporary American artist who continues the watercolor painting tradition. Ford borrows a painting style that recalls naturalists of previous centuries. The closer you study his paintings, you begin to realize that creatures he paints are altered, if not completely invented, and the situations they inhabit range from frightening to humorous to the absurd. Gouache is essentially an opaque watercolor that can be found in a tube. It is a fast-drying, water-soluble medium with an opacity that is somewhere in between that of watercolor and acrylic. Gouache is like the best of both worlds in that you can layer it to a very opaque consistency like acrylic paint, or you can make it very thin and washy like watercolor. Like watercolor, the binder in gouache is gum arabic. It has a slightly higher pigment-to-binder ratio though, and it usually includes an inert pigment like chalk to increase its opacity. Like watercolor, gouache is often used as a sketching medium. It was at the height of its popularity at the turn of the 20th century and has lost most of its contemporary constituents to acrylic paint. Egon Schiele was an Austrian artist from the early 20th century who is most well known for his emotionally charged gouache studies. Schiele's portraits often skew or distort their subjects. His work conveys a sense of immediacy and expressiveness that is unique to this medium.